I remember the summer the old house learned to listen. It stood at the edge of the village road, a moth-eaten yellow above the white trim. And even then, you could tell it had survived more summers than any child should hear. I was small enough to be delighted by the way the kitchen window held the light like a treasure, and old Mrs. Klein, who rented the place from my grandmother, kept her kettle singing when the rain began. I learned to polish the brass and to listen for the small sounds that no one else noticed. The sigh of a chair as if it remembered someone who had once sat there. The wind slipping through the keyhole like a whispered secret. The distant sound of the clock holding time in its folded hands. My friend Mara lived a few houses down, a girl with a stubborn shoulder of sun on her hair and eyes that found trouble and coaxed it into a story. We spent that summer chasing ghosts in the corners of the old house, though we called them legends instead of ghosts. The house did not frighten us. It offered a polite sort of authority, as if it were a respectable elder who would not soil the carpets with panic. We learned where the boards creaked and why the pantry door needed a patient hand. We learned where the cushions stored the dust of 100 afternoons. It felt like a place that remembered us, even when we could not remember ourselves clearly enough to trust our own names. On a day when the air was so thick with heat that even the walls seemed to sweat, Mara and I found the hidden stair. A narrow ladder behind a loose shelf in the pantry led to a small, forgotten chamber, a space that smelt of old rain and bees. Half-sung lullabies and the sort of quiet. There, pressed between two boards, lay a tiny wooden box and a folded sheet of parchment that bore the handwriting of someone who had learned to bless a house with necessity and memory. The parchment was a letter, a brittle thing, its ink pale as the breath of a winter morning. It spoke in a register of old debt and old promises, telling us, in effect, that the house would remember if we chose to remember it. It named a ritual, simple as a bread loaf and as grave as a prayer. Gather a circle of 3 small things, 2 coins and a marble, a thread from a piece of fabric, something that moved or rang when touched, and place them at the center of a floorboard that would never again creak in a predictable way. Then, at the hour when the sun slept behind the hill, whisper the name of someone who had been lost to the house itself, repeating it 3 times, and press the 3 objects into the circle. If done with patience, it would coax the house to tell its story again, to reveal a memory you could hold in your own hands. Mara wanted to do it. I did not want to. Not because I doubted the letter, but because I felt a thread of fear curl inside my ribs whenever Mara's voice dropped to a hush, as if she were listening for something that should not be listening. But I did not resist. I liked the way the house seemed to listen when we spoke, as if we had learned a language the bricks and plaster had always understood, a language older than names. That evening, we found 2 old coins in the cabinet by the kitchen sink, 1 copper, 1 silver. Mara found a marble that glowed in the dim light as if it contained a tiny sunset. I found a scrap of lilac-blue ribbon in the drawer where the linen napkin slept. We laid them in the circle on the floorboard I had never noticed before, a thin seam that ran across the room like a vein of exactitude. We cut a small circle in the dust, and in the circle we placed the coin, the marble, and the ribbon. We borrowed a thin thread from the hem of Mrs. Klein's curtains, the kind of thread that the old women in the village say is almost a spell in itself, and tied it to the marble so it could catch the breeze when we opened the window. Then Mara whispered the name of someone we missed 3 times, with a tremor in her voice, like a bird learning to speak. I whispered mine. and the house seemed to take a long, careful breath. The hour grew into a soft, unsettled hour. The air in the room thickened with the scent of lilac from the garden outside, and the walls seemed to lean closer, listening as if at a gate. A floorboard creaked somewhere far away, in a way that could not be explained by wind or by us. The coins clinked together in a way that did not sound like metal, but like the noise a small thing makes when it wakes from sleep. And the light changed. Perhaps a cloud crossed the sun. Perhaps something else shifted. And a sudden cold came down through the chimney. A cold that did not belong to the evening, but to a memory the house kept hidden in the floor. Mara's eyes widened and she whispered, "Do you hear that?" It was as if the house sighed. The sort of sigh a living thing gives when you have spoken to it honestly for the first time, and it decides to answer with its own truth. Not your truth about it. We did not see anything that could be called a ghost. Not exactly. But the room grew quieter for a moment. The kind of quiet that makes you feel your own heartbeat loud enough to hear the drum of it in your ears. The lilac in the air turned sweet and sour at the same time, like the moment when you realize a fruit you have loved forever is not quite as you remembered it. The letter's language seemed to glow faintly on the parchment, as if the words themselves could shift into shapes in the corner of the eye. We did not speak again for a long while. The objects remained in their circle, but the circle had become more than a circle. It felt like a boundary not to be crossed by a child's breath, the protection against something that was not yet spoken, but already listening. Then Mara's voice, soft as a moth's wing. The attic stairs, which we had never used at night, seemed to quiver with the thought of a long-ago midnight. And when we stood to leave, the circle looked different to me. The ribbon's end had worn away to a pale, soft thread that lay across the floor like the thin line of a memory being threaded through a needle. We kept the ritual to ourselves after that, never speaking its full name aloud again, as if the very act of naming could loosen the memory into something that walked outside the walls. The summer ended with the heat drawing back into the earth, and the house exhaled, as if it had remembered something it had been holding in, like a breath held too long. And I did not speak of what had happened, not in the terms of the ritual, not in any of the ways that would make it real to others. We lived with the knowledge that the house remembered more than we had the words to understand. Years passed, as they are wont to do, and the world changed in quiet, unremarkable ways. A different bus route, a new shop on the corner, a letter that never arrived, a door that no longer opened properly because